Welcome back to the Crypto Clown World podcast. I'm your host with the honks, Jason Bruce, honking back in on the 8th of June 2024. With me, as always, I have my co-host, Mr. Christopher Lundy. How you doing today, sir?
I am trying not to think that I don't know how to rock because, like Carl from Aqua Teen Hunger Force, I don't need instructions to know how to rock.
That is a fact. Either you got it or you don't. That is an absolute fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Aqua Teen's classic show.
Yeah, I haven't really gotten into that one, man. I was living out in Colorado when that one was really jumping off. So
Yeah.
you can be rest assured that I was in a proper frame of mind for that. But uh, at any rate,
The cheeky pop culture reference, right?
there you go. There you go. It's a good way to start off the show. So,
Oh,
as
yeah.
usual, there is a lot going on, both with the market and geopolitically and news wise. Ton of stuff. So, I don't want to waste anybody's time. As usual, I'll let you jump into our top story and we'll see what's happening.
Thank you, Jason. And yeah, this is an important story, especially with what's happening with the Navy right now and naval assets. Um, so, our top story for today is going to be an article from military.com. And the title of the article is Feds Arrest Former Navy Europe Commander Alleging Bribery Scheme That Led to $500,000 Civilian Salary. This is authored by Kelsey Baker at military.com. Here's the leader. So now retired U.S. Admiral was arrested Friday on federal bribery charges for allegedly steering contracts to a company in exchange for future employment while he was the commander of Navy forces in Europe, according to the Department of Justice. Allegedly, Robert Burke, who's the former four-star admiral commander of U.S. naval forces in Africa and Europe from 2020 to 2022, uh, he, he allegedly directed the lucrative Navy contracts to a company that's not identified in the documents while serving as a four-star admiral, and later hired him in 2022 for a starting salary of $500,000 annually. And two New York executives of the company were also arrested for their roles in the bribery scheme. Now, he was the Navy's second highest ranking officer, ladies and gentlemen. Second highest ranking officer, clasping upon allegedly bribes. So, and this is a quote from U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves in a released statement. Quote, as alleged in the indictment, Admiral Burke used his public office and his four-star status for his private gain. The law does not make exceptions for admirals or CEOs. It's funny. Those who pay and receive bribes must be held accountable. The urgency is at its greatest when, as here, senior government officials and senior executives are allegedly involved in the corruption. Close quote. Very interesting considering the amount of bribery that's already happening and the blackmail that's already happening that no one's getting arrested for. So, my take on the situation is that it's pretty clear that there are bridge building efforts happening uh, in terms of certain people within the military to try to root out corruption. The problem is that they're in the minority and they kind of have to tiptoe around it because the overall concept of this corruption is at present resulting in our flagship vessel, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, coming under anti-ship missile fire, ballistic missile fire specifically from Ansar Allah in Yemen, that created a very wide hole in its runway, preventing it from being able to launch any ships effectively. Now, this is according to uh, images that I saw on OSINT feeds, but they are not confirmed. But of course, they're not going to be confirmed officially for obvious reasons. We know why that is, but it did come under fire, and it, according to these images, did show some pretty significant damage. But bribery isn't the only problem we've got here. The problem is that we've got corrupt officials that are are already taking bribes that we don't know about. And if we've got the second highest ranking naval officer that's clearly directing these wars that Washington wants, you know, uh, it's obvious that this degree of enrichment in the people involved may not be the people that we want to be paying us bribes. Maybe perhaps they are the wrong bribe payers. that's that's why this article is really kind of make me shake my head. Didn't make sense to me. So also, just in this week, Ukraine is set to receive $2.2 billion directly from the IMF. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There's that's not a lot of money for Ukraine in terms of how much hardware they're getting blown to bits. So I think this is inconsequential because it's a rather small amount of money. But it's obvious that all of the ammunition of the failing Western dollar and what used to be the Bretton Woods system is being thrown at this meat grinder in Ukraine. Moving on to economic news. And some basic numbers on the annualized inflation rate. This is over the last 12 months. And I'm going to go over a list of countries, starting with Argentina and ending with China. So over the past year, Argentina has an annualized inflation rate of 289%. Turkey, just under 70%. Russia, 7.8%. South Africa, 5.2%. India, 4.83%. Mexico, 4.65%. Brazil, 3.69%. Australia, 3.6%. Spain, 3.6%. United States, 3.4%. Yeah, right. This is IMF data, by the way. So as I stated in previous shows, you can take it or leave it. Indonesia, 3%. South Korea, 2.9%. Canada, 2.7%. Netherlands, 2.7%. Singapore, 2.7%. And we're rounding it off at the bottom two with Italy at 0.8%, which is crazy low, and China at 0.3% inflation. So China has almost entered deflation, which tells me that they are selling all the dollars they have. And that's probably why their inflation rate is going lower, is because they have dumped record amounts of U.S. treasuries and they're rapidly acquiring gold like there's no tomorrow. Of course, they've got a demographic crisis on their hands. But my thoughts on this are, especially with Argentina and Turkey, the inflation rates with Turkey are necessitating heavy gold buying, and I'm going to go over that later in the show. As for Argentina, best way I can describe that is a vulture capitalist sacrifice of the country. It's hyperinflation by any standard. Anytime your currency loses that much of its purchasing power, you're basically being Greasified. Moving on. Also, in terms of hyperinflation, Nigeria, this is not really in those numbers, but Nigeria, the Nigerian naira, priced in US dollars, the first of this year, it was 882, and now it's 1,487. So we've got a nearly 50% decline in the value of the Nigerian naira in less than 6 months. So it's pretty clear to me that, especially with what's happening in Nigeria, that there are two different factors that are coming into play here. One, they wanted to apply for BRICS, and two, they had this aggressive pro-Western CBDC thing. So there's a tug of war happening in Nigeria for influence, and I think Russia's starting to win that fight, especially considering some of the other brilliant geopolitical moves in the Sahel, as well as the Red Sea regions that I'll cover later in the show. Moving on. NVIDIA's market cap, as we discussed last week, is also accelerating rapidly. At the beginning of 2020, NVIDIA's market cap was $144 billion. Now it's $2.7 trillion. It's now the second largest company in the world. It surpassed Apple this week. So investors are piling into NVIDIA. And NVIDIA is essentially what's holding up the S&P 500. So any decline in all of this malinvestment or overinvestment into AI or potential overinvestment is going to have massive negative impacts for the stock market, because our stock market is becoming a one-trick pony economy. The only things we produce are AI chatbots and bombs. So it's going to be a fun one. Moving on. This is pretty interesting. This is according to various popular news reports in Arab media. A new scandal has arrived in Egypt. The German embassy there is purportedly acting as a Mossad base, according to various reports. The German embassy used its intelligence assets to collaborate with the Israeli Mossad. Over 200 German citizens and Palestinian employees of German institutions in Gaza have been actually placed under investigation over potential links to Hamas, but they're all aid workers with various organizations. They're not they're not fighters; they're just aid workers. So the German intelligence has also scrutinized visa applications from Palestinians, who they also accuse of the said applicants of so-called quote anti-Semitism close quote. So this is a massive uh, influence operation that's meant to contain Palestinians in the combat zone to ensure their death. That's the only reason why they're denying these things, because they intend to make sure they die. That's my read on that. Moving on, and this is a big story. Um, Maldives, which is an archipelago country, has announced publicly that it has decided to change its laws to prevent Israeli passport holders from entering the country, citing Israelis' war on Gaza. Now, the Maldives, for those that aren't familiar, is a Muslim country, and they have valid concerns, especially considering that many Israelis are fleeing Israel for other countries, interestingly, in the Muslim world. And considering what's happening there, the genocidal rhetoric that's happening on a daily basis from settlers, from leaders of the country, from the United States of America, etc., it's not going to be a situation that is going to be favorable for the Maldives. And a U.S. congressman this week put forward a bill to defund the Maldives of all its foreign aid. So, what this is a clue is that American foreign aid to countries is dependent upon their support for Israel. So that is going to be something that will continue to erode American prestige, using foreign aid as a means of coercion. Moving on. So, and this is staying within the Africa zone. I'm going to be covering Africa more than normal in this report, but not excessively. So the deputy head of the Sudanese Sovereign Council, and I haven't talked about Sudan much because I'm still learning about Sudan. I know very little about Africa, and I've been educating myself as much as I can about geopolitical, historical reference points within all contexts of Africa that are relevant to this conflict and relevant to the changing geopolitical landscape. So expect to hear more from me on that, ladies and gentlemen. So Malik Agar is his name. He's the deputy head of the Sudanese Sovereign Council. He traveled to Russia this week to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, it is alleged, it's not formally confirmed anywhere, but it's alleged that the Sudanese authorities have accepted a Russian proposal, and this proposal involves the following. Now, Russia is stating that they will arm Sudan to fight rapid support forces. My take on this is they're going to provide them with access to their electronic warfare capabilities and their missiles and various other types of technologies, including tanks, etc., possibly even allowing their renamed Africa Corps, which used to be called Wagner, to come in there as well. Russia is really starting to flex its muscle hardcore in Africa. Why? Because of its geographical proximity to the Eastern Mediterranean. My read on this will come later, but in exchange for arming Sudan for that rapid support force, ladies and gentlemen, in return, Russia will get a port in Sudan on the Red Sea. My read on this is Russia, along with Iran and Yemen, intend to contain American and Israeli naval assets in the Eastern Mediterranean, blockade them there, and prevent them from escaping. And if they continue the war, they will start targeting their vessels. It's entirely possible. So, how that happens will most likely be through Russian proxies because they don't want to get into direct strikes. That's my read on it. Moving on. Big economic news out of Turkey. Central Bank of Turkey, as of April 2024, was the largest buyer of gold in the world, and they increased their official reserves by 8 tons. Now, also on Tuesday of this week, Turkish Foreign Minister Fidan announced that Turkey has expressed its desire to become a member of BRICS. So, what does this mean? Well, it's pretty simple. With the extreme inflation Turkey is experiencing of 70% annualized, they're going to have to find a way to monetize that debt, but there's no way to monetize it in the Western financial system anymore. There's no way to hyperinflate it back into stability or to redenominate. This is different. What this tells me is that, along with the BRICS payment system that was announced this week by President Putin, is that they intend to pair stablecoins and crypto assets with physical precious metal. I think that Russia and Turkey intend to have direct redeemability for money again. This has not existed since the Bretton Woods arrangement. But the difference here is that the Bretton Woods arrangement only allowed nation states to collect on it. This may, it is rumored, I don't know if it's true or not, but the rumor is that direct redemption will be able to be done at banks like you used to be able to do it at banks here in the United States. You hand them, a $20 bill and you get $20 worth of silver. So full reserve banking appears to be on the horizon again, ladies and gentlemen. That's going to have massive consequences for the global economy, and especially considering the debt averse nature of new rising power players and the cultural forbidding of the charging of interest in Islam. When you pair those two things together, it starts to make more sense as to why Russia is partnering so excessively with Africa and the Ummah, because they had put forward plans to create physical gold based economies, physical silver based economies with immense abundance. And the vision of Muammar Gaddafi may actually come true after all, ladies and gentlemen. So there will be lots of vindication, there'll be lots of demonization, but the healers and the tyrants will be properly identified this time, I predict. Moving on. So there's a Wall Street Journal report in regards to China, and the title of it is China wants a bigger role in the Middle East, but not too big. Here's the leader, and this is out of Singapore. China sought to pitch itself as a friendlier global power to governments in the Middle East this week, yet its reluctance to offer a security presence is limiting Beijing's influence in the region. So, just from that leader, what I can say is that Beijing is unwilling to commit forces directly in these conflicts because they are more focused on their immediate territorial surroundings in regards to the situation with Taiwan and the situations in the South China Sea, as well as areas approaching the Philippines and Japan. They've got a situation in the Pacific, and there are likely to be problems there if they overextend their assets. And Chinese leader Xi Jinping hosted senior officials from Arab nations, including leaders of Egypt and the UAE, for a China Arab States conference in Beijing on Thursday of this week, just 2 days ago. Now, that's pretty simply China sees an opportunity here, and they want to expand their soft power, to promote their brand, a foreign policy, essentially. Uh, it's hard to say whether China's leading Russia or Russia's leading China at this point, or if they intend to improve each other through practical dialogue and practical exchange of financial closeness. But Russia should be careful here because China hasn't exactly treated its own people anywhere near as well as Russia has over the course of the last 30 years. They only very recently ended their one-child policy, which lasted from 1979 until 2016. So just keep that in mind. Moving on. Big news out of the airline industry. So this is according to a Zero Hedge article. The title of the article is Boeing enters new territory with federal probe and possible criminal charges. This is actually happening, ladies and gentlemen. And it's pretty obvious as to why, because when you got planes falling out of the air, engines blowing up as soon as they take off, this is a national security issue, especially considering a major part supplier like Boeing. So when a door, and here's the leader, when a door panel ripped off of an Alaskan Airlines flight after takeoff on January 5th, 2024, Boeing's fortunes changed overnight. Had the company gone just 2 more days without an incident, it would have satisfied a settlement to avoid a criminal prosecution by the DOJ, Department of Justice. But instead, the accident has triggered investigations by federal agencies and congressional hearings. The incident also renewed public scrutiny of Boeing, and the 737 MAX 8 crashes in 2018 and 2019, respectively, killed everyone on board and led to criminal charges for the company. So, what my take on this situation is rather simple. There are going to be major companies that are either going to have to be forcibly nationalized or that are going to be given indefinite suspension of business decrees as a matter of national security, and because it's pretty obvious that this type of this is starting to look like it's deliberate sabotage at this point, because you don't make these types of mistakes over and over again. There's an old Roman proverb that to make mistakes is human, but to continue making mistakes is diabolic. So, and I think we can possibly at least tacitly agree that what's happening in the world is rather diabolic, especially with what's happening with Boeing. But this is a rather long article. But the potential criminal charges is at the end, and it says that the DOJ can pursue multiple pathways if it criminally prosecutes Boeing. Boeing's already been sanctioned by China, so not only is the American government going on taking on Boeing, the Chinese government and the American government. That should tell you a lot, ladies and gentlemen. If the United States and China are united in saying what was going on with you, Boeing, then that means that someone other than the Chinese or the United States of America is running Boeing. And there's some undue influence campaigns happening here, in my opinion. So Niyama Rahmani is a former federal prosecutor, and she once worked for Boeing. Excuse me, once worked for Boeing. He told the Epoch Times that the Department of Justice could issue a, quote, massive fine, close quote, as well as requiring an independent monitor to, quote, ensure that Boeing is complying with its obligations under the agreement, close quote, or prosecute individuals in the company, such as their CEO, Dave Calhoun. So what they're going to do is they're basically going to have an inspector on site at every single one of their factories all the time to make sure that they're keeping things above board, because they have to at this point. There's been BBC undercover investigations in Boeing. There's been all kinds of investigations of Boeing. Whistleblowers turning up dead. The cover up is, it's not going to work out this time, because they cut too many corners and they've caused too many deaths, which is interesting because it's not like we don't seem to have problems with deaths being caused in wars. Why is this such an issue? Well, because it affects their ability to transport arms, right? And that's probably the only reason why they're going after Boeing so hard at this stage. Moving on. And this is a crazy story when I first saw this, ladies and gentlemen, because this is the New York Times reporting on this. Couldn't believe it when I saw it. Here's the article. Tel Aviv secretly targeted U.S. lawmakers with fake social media accounts spreading pro-Israel propaganda. This is New York Times. So, a covert campaign commissioned by Israel's Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, which is a government body that connects Jews around the world, they organized and paid for an influence campaign last year targeting U.S. lawmakers and the American public. They hired out a company for $2 million for this operation, and the company is called Stoic. It's a political marketing firm in Tel Aviv to carry it out, and this is according to Israeli officials and public documents. And the campaign used hundreds of fake accounts that posed as real Americans on X, Facebook, and Instagram to post pro-Israel comments. And the accounts focused on U.S. lawmakers, particularly ones who are black and Democrats. So, what does this mean? Well, that means that a lot of this propaganda you're seeing is essentially chatbots. It's not even real people. So this AI narrative is starting to get out of control, and this is where the undue influence is coming in, is to flood the zone. Now, if you go back to the exercise from October 2019, which was Event 201, if you go back to that, there was one of the senior officials at CDC had stated that a couple of interesting things. It says that we need to be thinking outside of our historical perspective. This is a war footing that we need to be on. And there was also comments about flooding the zone. Now, for those that aren't familiar with propaganda warfare and psychological operations, flooding the zone is a propaganda tactic that overwhelms the information space with narratives, making it difficult to find counter narratives by publishing very large amounts of false stories. So this is an example of flooding the zone. So be on the lookout for that, ladies and gentlemen, and consider carefully what you consume on these social media networks, because I expect that there's going to be a lot of fake accounts if there aren't already a huge inflow of them. Following up on following up on last week's comment that I made briefly about Ron DeSantis being in Guantanamo Bay, I wanted to remind the audience of a Guardian article that was published in 2023, April 28th, 2023, and it is entitled Ron DeSantis in Guantanamo, How Questions About His Past Haunt the Florida Governor. And here is the leader. And at the time, he was a young lawyer for the U.S. Navy. he was posted to that camp. But what he did there and his role in the investigation of 3 deaths remains controversial. In the middle of a June night 17 years ago, in the Guantanamo prison camp, guards and medical orderlies were urgently summoned to one of the inmate clinics where an emergency was unfolding, and goes over how two of those inmates had been rushed to the hospital on that base, but were declared dead soon after. They were found hanging from their necks with their hands and feet bound in rags in their throats. Right? And it shows an official photograph of Governor DeSantis as a U.S. Navy ensign. He joined the Navy in 2004. And Rear Admiral Harry Harris, it goes on in the site, that arrived at Camp Delta, which is the main internment center. The base commander, who would go on to command the Pacific Fleet, accompanied by Colonel Michael Baumgartner, head of the overall prison complex. At some point, witnesses stated that a more junior officer turned up, and that was Ron DeSantis that turned up. And then, so he had been part of a small legal team tasked with ensuring the guards and other military personnel followed the law. He was the most junior judge advocate general in the camp, but after the 3 deaths of the night of June 9th, 2006, his superior officer, Captain Patrick McCarthy, ordered him to start collecting evidence. So, and it's interesting because McCarthy later told, I believe, the Washington Post, according to the article, he stated that, I quote, "I cannot tell you specifically what DeSantis did," close quote. He said his subordinate was probably, quote, "involved in facilitating access to information, trying to make sure that privileged information did not get swept up. He would have been one of the folks that I dispatched to help facilitate the investigative effort," close quote. Privileged information did not get swept up. What privileged information? So Mr. DeSantis was essentially a fixer trying to prevent something from happening. This something was such a horrific death. So read that article, ladies and gentlemen, and think really hard about these pro-freedom, quote-unquote, Republicans. They are not who they seem. They virtue signal in the exact same way the cultural Marxists do, and in many cases, they are the same thing. They're just pretend. They're what we have domestically in the United States at present, from my perspective, is we have communism with conservative characteristics and communism with liberal characteristics. And the establishment's trying to drive a wedge in the population to turn us against each other so that they can kind of sit back and enjoy their cognac. Well, don't fall for the propaganda, ladies and gentlemen. These people are not your friends. So let's move on. Okay, so an infographic really interested me today, and this infographic, the source is the Russian Ministry of Finance, and in this infographic, it shows Russia's oil and gas tax revenue rises on an annualized basis, and the nation, and it goes on to state that oil revenue is calculated by including extraction tax on gas condensate, refinery subsidies, and profit-based oil tax. It's got two different references here: oil revenue in black and gas revenue in blue. So, to look at this chart, it says that the Ministry of Finance has stated that oil revenues to the Russian budget in May of 2024 increased by almost 50% to $7.1 billion compared to 2023. How did this happen? Well, what happened was that the Urals oil prices rose from $58.6 to $74.98 per barrel, and Moscow adapted to the sanctions and the G7 price ceiling by repricing it themselves. So it's a pretty brilliant geopolitical counter move there. And it just goes to show that how all these sanctions are backfiring massively. Moving on. Spanish court has granted bail to Roger Ver. And this is in relation to an extradition case that is currently going on involving Mr. Ver, where he's being facing extradition to the U.S. on tax fraud charges. He's allowed to leave jail on May 17th of this year after posting a 150,000 euro in bail on the condition that he remain in Spain and hand over his passport. So now authorities are seeking his extradition. He reportedly failed to report capital gains or pay taxes on his holdings of Bitcoin, which he started to acquire in 2011. Bear purportedly sold Bitcoins for approximately on or around 240 million euro in 2017, but allegedly did not tell his accountant about the sale, according to the documents. And at the end, it states that Vera, quote, is not a fugitive at all since he has been in touch with the U.S. authorities through his Californian lawyers, close quote. His lawyer, Jaime Campaner, stated. And he goes on to state that, quote, therefore he was aware of the investigation and, in my opinion, his arrest didn't make sense, close quote. So uh, my take on the situation is that there is an effort to squeeze anybody that has any resources at all. And, I don't have the best read on Mr. Ver or what his actual actions are in this context, but they could easily go after even higher net worth individuals on this, but they choose not to for a reason. They could go after anybody they wanted because I think it's pretty safe to conclude that you know many high net worth individuals aren't handing over their uh, tax revenue in this context. This has geopolitical significance as well as we move on to the story out of Europe. McDonald's has lost its Big Mac trademark in the European Union to Irish rival Supermax. Now, a top European court has ruled that McDonald's has lost its Big Mac trademark in the 27 nation bloc, ruling in favor of Irish fast food rival Supermax in a long running legal battle. What does this mean? Well, it means that McDonald's is not likely to have a lot of success for various reasons. They're being boycotted relentlessly all over the Middle East and in many areas of Southeast Asia. They had a significant hit to their revenue as a result of that, including this week in, I believe it was Austria, where I believe it was in Vienna, a group of activists came together and cooked a large amount of food to protest against McDonald's finance in support of Israel's genocide in Gaza. So that is going to have massive consequences for their revenue generation. Not to mention that their food is not exactly healthy to eat in the first place. But it's interesting because I've actually eaten at a Supermax 24 years ago when I traveled to Ireland, and in fact, the food was so cheap and so good that I mostly ate at Supermax rather than going to the pubs. Probably not the best food choice, but if you're a broke college student and you know literally 50 cents would give me their largest burger. It's like, cool. And that was a glorious trip for me, ladies and gentlemen. It was a really cool time in my life, but also one of many different aspects personally that opened my eyes to the differences in geopolitics and how much different Ireland looked then versus now, and also how different in terms of how traumatized the nation has become as a result of many of the geopolitical issues since then. Because at the time they were still using the Irish pound, and then they later went to the euro in 2002, and after that, Ireland experienced significant inflation and destruction of purchasing power. Moving on, so the United States is imposing visa sanctions, as we know, on Georgian citizens. Dozens of them, including officials and members of their families, have followed. They followed through on that threat. So it's pretty obvious at this point that Georgia is not going to be part of the fold. But one of the most important things is that they are moving into a fold where they're going to have access to better things. But the problem right now is that I expect that there's going to be violent confrontations. There's going to be efforts to assassinate officials. Until they start sanctioning you and taking away your money, that's just the first step. It's not an intimidation campaign. It's basically just a coercion campaign to try to force them back into the fold. I don't see it being successful personally. Uh, in another breaking story, and this is really important, probably the most important story I'll cover in the show, is an Associated Press article came out this week, and it stated that multiple Russian Navy warships are headed for the Caribbean for unscheduled drills, and this is following American approval of Ukraine using NATO-supplied weapons and strikes inside Russia. And now it's going to be 4 Russian ships, and they're heading to Havana in Cuba. And Cuban officials are citing friendly relations. And 4 Russian ships, including a nuclear-powered submarine, will arrive in Havana next week, starting on June the 12th. For quote, now the Cuban officials are stating that the reasoning for this cites quote historically friendly relations close quote between both nations, and they'll be in Havana between June 12th and June 17th. None of them will be carrying any nuclear weapons, and their presence, quote, does not represent a threat to the region, close quote, according to the Cuban Foreign Ministry. And Washington has been tracking Russian warships and aircraft that were expected to arrive in the Caribbean for military exercise. And U.S. officials have stated that the exercise would be part of a broader Russian response to the U.S. support for Ukraine. My thinking on this matter is that this is a show of force exercise for Russia, but it's also a soft power exercise for them because they're simply going to show us that if they wish to, they could potentially blockade the Caribbean. If they do that, we're not going to send oil anywhere because all of our refineries are in the Gulf of Mexico. And if the Gulf of Mexico is blockaded and we can't get those ships out of the Caribbean, there's not going to be any oil going to Europe. And that will force Europe to come back to the negotiating table with Russia to say, hey, are you guys going to fix up Nord Stream 2 and come to your senses? Or do we have to keep going? I think that's going to be how they follow up with this if things continue to get worse. If that blockade happens, that's going to have massive consequences for the American economy and chaos and panic potentially as well, because it could affect freedom of navigation. And Russia may even attempt to partner with Mexico militarily, and it's entirely possible that that could happen, especially considering that Mexico is applied to join BRICS. There are geopolitical aspects to Mexico that I'll cover most likely in the next couple of weeks' shows, but they just recently concluded an election. But I want to let that bake in the oven for a little while before I start to comment on it. So, in other news, the UN has decided to place Israel on a blacklist alongside ISIS, Al Qaeda, and Boko Haram, according to a report. And now, Israeli officials failed to lobby the UN against the move. They described as, quote, highly problematic, close quote, as it could lead to countries imposing arms embargoes on Tel Aviv. So, and they'll be able to very easily do so now because if they're on that list, they can simply cite that. So, since the attempts at the Security Council to get a ceasefire through have failed, this is likely Russian pressure to do this. I highly suspect that Russia was behind this because Russia has publicly called for sanctions against Israel to be introduced due to their failure to abide by Security Council resolutions, as well as ICC orders to stop the genocide in Gaza and to halt the Rafah assault, which they did not. I also wanted to comment briefly on an anecdote from Georgia, the state of Georgia in the Caucasus. A very telling quote came out this week from the mayor of Tbilisi, and that's Kakha Kaladze, and it just as follows: "Quote: Georgia is not someone's vassal. Georgia is not a country that someone will use in their own interests, destroy the world, and repeat the fate of Ukraine. We protect this country. We protect the world. We want to keep the peace." Close quote. Nobody wants to repeat the fate of Ukraine, clearly. And they know exactly what happens when you allow State Department lackeys such as Mikhail Saakashvili into the halls of power in Georgia. Chaos ensues, and they know the score. They know which way the wind is blowing. Moving on, I had to look at a really powerful series of infographics this week stating that 94% of Americans and 88% of Western Europeans have formally believe, according to this. This is published by a think tank called the Institute for Global Affairs, and it states that 94% of Americans and 88% of Western Europeans believe that NATO should end the war in Ukraine without weakening Russia or returning Ukraine to its pre-war borders. So that basically means that Western support for the war is gone. It's lost. It's not going to be gotten back. The only thing that the establishment has left is force. That's all they have left. Speaking of force, an alarming event happened this week in Denmark. Prime Minister of Denmark, her name is Mette Frederiksen. She was attacked by a man in central Copenhagen. And the extent of her injuries is not clear, but the attacker has been arrested. I have not seen any updated reports on her condition. So we'll see what happens there. Interesting news out of Afghanistan. The Taliban government, and this is in relation to the migrant crisis, right? So the Taliban government has formally requested to Germany to deport any criminals from Afghanistan that are currently in Germany back to Afghanistan. So there's a repatriation effort amongst many countries to bring these criminals back, because what people don't realize is that this mass migration was not instituted by these governments. It's instituted by private corporations, NGOs, and people outside the purview of these governments, and they're not having it because they understand that this is being used as a way to covertly transport military age men, not families seeking shelter. So there's been a misapplication of how this has been going on, and you know, and the Taliban is now has a former partnership with the Russian government. So it's interesting how things turn about. Um, there's a very serious warning this week, yesterday actually, from a former Mossad official. His name is Haim Tomir, and he put together several talking points about this, purported war in Lebanon that Israel has publicly been stating that they're going to start for the last 7 or 8 months. So here they are. Now, a large-scale war with Hezbollah will undermine Israel's ability to function as a state. Total war poses a threat to the Zionist vision of Israel. A large-scale war will make the fate of Acre, Haifa, Tiberias, and perhaps Tel Aviv the same as the fate of Kiryat Shimona. Kiryat Shimona is the settlement in northern Israel that's come under heavy bombardment and had a 2,500-acre fire erupt during a Berkhan missile strike recently. Hezbollah's missiles will paralyze Israel, including Ben Gurion and Haifa airports. Hezbollah has precise missiles that can blow up Israel's gas fields in seconds. And the Air Force is no longer free to operate over Lebanon due to the detection system that Iran provided them with. And we are at a historical crossroads, and we must accept Biden's proposal. So there are high-ranking voices within Israel's military intelligence establishment that are perhaps have cooler heads that in this particular official was closely aligned, according to my research, if it is correct, with Yitzhak Rabin, who, prior to his assassination in 1995, capitulated to the Palestinian issue and stating that the land should be returned to them. And he was killed not long afterwards. So it is my read on this situation that there are people outside the purview of the military establishment that are trying to find, shall we say, more transparent brokers that will, say what needs to be said. And I think it's prudent that this particular individual, Haim Tomir, came forward with this. He understands that the game has changed militarily, and one thing to remember is that all of Israel had GPS jamming running on it during the Iranian retaliation strike against them in April. And all their missiles still hit accurately. 2 Israeli bases were completely destroyed in that attack. And they got past all their air defenses. And that single attack, that one attack, ladies and gentlemen, cost $1.3 billion to defend against. But it only cost Iran tens of millions. So this churn is not just military, it's economic. Because at some point, the money is going to stop flowing and the weapons are going to run out. And then the negotiations will not be two ways, they will be one sided. That's most likely what's coming in my view. A couple more stories. I'm going to finish off with one more geopolitical story and one more story on precious metals. So, with geopolitics, a big report came out today. Everything seems to be a bombshell report right now because there's some big news coming out this month, ladies and gentlemen. And this is according to a Cradle article entitled, quote, "Troops hid inside aid truck for deadly U.S.-Israel operation at Nusayrat." Or Nusayrat, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. My Arabic pronunciation is a little, it's like a tongue twister sometimes. The Palestinian resistance, this is the leader, the Palestinian resistance called the operation a, quote, "complex war crime," close quote, and reported that the Israeli army killed a number of their remaining captives during a massacre that left over 200 dead. Israeli ground forces hid inside a truck used for the delivery of humanitarian aid to infiltrate the Nusayrat refugee camp on June 8th and perpetuate a new massacre of more than 200 Palestinians. This was footage aired by Al Jazeera TV, showed the truck inside inside Nusayrat, accompanied by armored tanks. And this is exclusive from the Palestinian Chronicle that was published on June 8th. Exclusive Al Jazeera footage, a group of the Israeli army infiltrated Nusayrat disguised as humanitarian relief workers and used humanitarian aid trucks to release the 4 captives in the central Gaza Strip. So, a truck carrying humanitarian aid and clothes, and suddenly 10 soldiers got out, and this is according to a witness. Uh, quote, a truck arrived carrying humanitarian aid and clothes, and suddenly 10 soldiers got out and shot me, once in the chest and twice in the feet. Artillery shelling started, and I saw dozens of citizens on the ground, including people with their heads cut off. Close quote. A Palestinian man who survived the massacre told reporters. Quote, the truck came from the American port that the occupation established in the Gaza Sea. Close quote, he adds. Quote, they were in a truck carrying clothes and cooking pans. Close quote. This is according to a wounded Palestinian eyewitness who described the Israeli forces who snuck into the refugee camp today in a humanitarian aid truck coming from the American pier. So this whole humanitarian aid truck was all a ruse. It was basically just a port constructed to bring in more direct involvement to increase this. And this is going to have massive consequences, ladies and gentlemen. There's going to be problems here because, at least publicly and openly, there was no acknowledgement of U.S. troops even being on the ground in Gaza. And now we got proof that that's the case. So I would expect that more senior U.S. officials are going to get roped into the ICJ case. I fully expect that to happen. In fact, Lindsey Graham, a U.S. senator, stated publicly that if the ICC goes after Israel and successfully goes after them the way that they're going after them, then we are next. So he understands the way the wind is blowing as well. And last of the day, price changes in the last month for precious metals and base metals. And we've got some interesting numbers here. So we got silver up 6.8%. Gold is down 0.7%. Copper is down 1.3%. Platinum down 1.5%. Steel 1.5% down. Iron ore is now down 7%. And lithium is down 8.1%. Why is lithium down 8.1%? Well, hard to say, but there was a massive discovery of lithium recently in Ukraine. And it appears that this rare earth element is becoming more abundant if its price is going to change that much. But it could also be financialization. It could be a series of things. But lithium is also a heavily utilized component in the making of electric vehicles. But I don't expect the electric vehicle market to be much of a thing in the coming years, especially considering that nobody wants them. But that's all for today's report, Jason. If you got some Q&A or things you want to follow up on, feel free to fire away, sir. Other than that, I'll pass it over to you for TA.
Thank you, as always, Mr. Christopher Lundy. Enlightening and, man, it's always a lot to take in. Usually a little more than I'm ready for. So, you've got some economic stuff that obviously can bear itself out here, and we're starting to see some big volatility come in metals, right? Because like gold and silver, they were kind of pumping, and now all of a sudden they've dumped over the last 24 hours or so here. So pretty significant dump actually. Like silver was trading up around 32, almost $33 for a short period of time, and now it's sitting below 30, just above $29. So that's pretty heavy volatility for metals. I mean, a 10% move in that short of a period of time, we're talking from May 20th to around right now. So what, 20 days? That's pretty heavy volatility for metals, man. That's not something that you usually see. So your question at this point, I guess, would be what's causing that? What's creating volatility in something that's usually a lot more stable within the market, or at least has been over the last few years. It seems like that volatility is starting to pick up now. Is that part of what you were talking about, where you're seeing countries like Turkey start to buy more gold? You got China dumping treasuries. There's all these economic factors at play. So what it's translating to for me and all the charts that I'm seeing pretty much is that we're going to see increased volatility in pretty much everything. So I would just buckle up, folks, and commodities are going to be something you want to be in.
Yeah, I concur with that comment. One thing I would add to it is that this type of volatility speaks to a very simple quote. And I would just respond to the quote, not with analysis here, but it's very simple. All fiat currency returns to its intrinsic value. Zero.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's
Where
about
we
as
are.
simple as it gets. If you don't have anything backing up the currency, right? Then there's going to be a dearth of value. So, what's backing our currency at this point? It's about to shift from being oil to nothing, right? It's what you just said
Yeah.
in your report.
Yeah.
So, what do we have to back up our currency? Is this volatility starting to reflect that? And this is the crazy thing too, because you've got the DXY pumping now. So the dollar index is pumping. You've got countries like Nigeria, printing their currency into oblivion, down over 30% in the last month. So
Mm.
we're not printing right now like crazy. I mean, I'm sure there's some printing going on. There has to be some, but it's not like it was a few years ago during the pandemic where there was this, insane, just trillions of dollars being printed. So where does the liquidity come from right now? And why is there a value in the dollar? Well, are other countries just devaluing their currency more than ours? Is are we just the best toilet paper on the block? Are we the two-ply double thick Charmin? I don't know what else to call it.
Well,
So
the petrodollar ceases to exist as of tomorrow because on June 9th, what happens? The arrangement, the 50-year deal that was signed between the United States of America and Saudi Arabia to establish the petrodollar in 1974 expires and will not be renewed, and Saudi Arabia will not accept U.S. dollars in exchange for their oil.
that seems like something to me that would cause insane volatility in markets.
Yeah, but it hasn't happened yet. So
Well, nobody's talking
take a
about
look at the
it.
money.
So, like, if
Yeah.
the
We
masses
are.
don't
I
hear
am.
about it, right? If the masses don't
Yeah.
hear about it, though, they don't have any way to panic or react, right? So, is this something that's being kept under wraps, and then all of a sudden they'll just drop it when it comes out? Like, hey, we just had this happen. There could be an economic impact, and then the markets react.
Well, we still got a banking crisis that has yet to play out. We still got a banking crisis that has yet to play out, and I've spoken to the insolvency of the COMEX, massive outflows from precious metals ETFs into crypto ETFs, which tells me that physical delivery is clearly becoming the preferred choice. Massive expatriation of gold and silver is here, and publicly, even establishment channels like Kitco are stating that silver is, quote, catastrophe insurance, close quote, in various interviews. Think about what that means, catastrophe insurance. That tells me that historically gold has been that catastrophe insurance, but why is silver the case? Because it's far more rare than it was 100 years ago, by a long shot. 10 times more rare, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, definitely. And then it's access to that stuff and supply chains. Like, you were talking about lithium. The majority of that comes from China, right? So,
Yep. Yep.
you know, use that information wisely. You were talking about the inflation rates too. I mean, why is China's inflation rate down? Well, it could be a huge supply of rare earth metals and other things that they're sitting on. So,
Yep.
yeah, just little math to do there and kind of figure out why things are the way they are. So if you dump treasuries and you're holding on to, rare earth metals and commodities and things that have intrinsic value, then, you're going to experience a lower rate of inflation. So what are we doing?
Prepare to see them.
We're exhausting our oil reserves, and that's what our dollar is priced in. So how is our dollar pumping? These are like inverse correlations that I don't totally understand. I'm not an economist, so I'm just over here like speculating, why is this and could it result in this?
Prepare to see the mother of all margin calls in the energy markets within the next 5 to 10 years.
All right, there you have it, folks. So, yeah, I mean, uh, what you have here, what I'm looking at on this DXY chart, honestly, is really odd. Like, if you didn't know how to read divergences, you wouldn't have known that this was going to pump. Like out of the 4 hour, it looks like it's an obvious head and shoulders that could have dumped down further. But then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this thing puts in this divergence and it pumps up literally like a point. I mean, you don't see the DXY pump a point in a day very often. So that's a pretty significant move. And as to whether that continues or not, it looks right now like breakout and retest. So, when I move out to like a 22-hour time frame, which is a time frame that's kind of used by institutions, uh, this definitely shows me a much larger bullish divergence. And it shows me this move by the DXY actually has teeth. So I would watch your assets short term here as far as how much of a move this actually makes. It's kind of like a bit of a falling wedge, but the thing to be aware of here is that price was briefly below the 200 daily moving average and has broken out of it with volume. So when you see a move like that, typically it's got some bullish bias. And, we could zoom out here further and try to confirm that. 5 days really not showing me anything. This just looks like consolidation now, and it actually doesn't look all that bullish. So let's let this move play out on the shorter time frames. What I'd really like to see is, consolidation range stay sideways for the DXY, maybe lose that 200 daily again, and at that point, if there's finally a decisive move that comes in, what's been a pretty long consolidation around that 200 daily and also around like the midpoint of the Bollinger Band on the 5 day here, could see a move back down to like the 200 weekly moving average, which is just below the 100 level. So, strength coming into the dollar right now just doesn't make sense to me. But what we're seeing on the charts, at least shorter term, is something different. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. We did have a short-term dump in BTC as well, which kind of corresponded to that too. So certainly something to keep an eye on. When we look at it, from CME, this looks like it could be just a potential breakout and retest of this kind of triangle pattern. So it doesn't look horrible to me. Keep in mind, CME closed the week at 69,650, so you're going to have gap up or gap down depending on where the price action moves within the next 24 hours. So when we look at the macro, we're sitting on the weekly, and technically we're in a position of strength on the stochastics. It's got a little bit of a curve that I kind of don't like. Like it's trying to curve back down. You haven't made a confirmation on the RSI yet. It's still literally just sitting right on that 70 level. It is pointing up, however, so that's somewhat encouraging. You're technically printing a bullish candle this week. It did bullish engulf the previous red candle from the week before. So, if it closes at this level, which we're currently at like 69.3 on Bitstamp, which big news there too, actually. Bitstamp was bought out by Robinhood. So Robinhood has chosen to buy the dip by buying another exchange. So Bitstamp it's been kind of a low volume exchange for a while now. It's an older school exchange. I actually use it for macro charts because their price history goes back a little further, as you can see here. But interesting that Robinhood acquired Bitstamp, so something to keep an eye on there too. As we kind of move over to the 4 hour, BTC is starting to lose strength a little bit here. It's been consolidating in a really tight range since it made a move down there on kind of a flash. It's being supported right now by the 50 MA. It's just above the 100 MA. Did get a wick off of that, and we're well above the 200. So if the price is going to gravitate back to the 200, you're looking at like just below 67K is your support level there. Something to keep in mind though, it appears, and we'll go ahead and confirm that here, you got a pretty nice retracement to the golden pocket, wick down just below it, and now you're actually consolidating above the 0.5 fib. So in terms of the local retracement on the 4-hour, this is not all that bearish. What you really need to see is price action find support, hopefully for the bulls above this 0.5 fib, or at the very least, retest double bottom, come back down, test the golden pocket again. And you're going to want to retake this 21 MA at about 70.3K. And this point of control here is going to be your level of contention that's just below 71K. So if you start closing 4-hour candles above 71K, we can start to potentially take a hack at those all-time highs again. But if this area here fails, you're looking at volume gapping down to this point of control here. It's about 67.7. If that doesn't hold again, you've got this area of support, which would be coming in around the 200 daily moving average, or around the 200 MA, excuse me, just below 67K. So you can watch for that. Something to keep an eye on here. There is actually a slight hidden bullish divergence on the 4-hour that corresponds with this wick down here. So not all bad what I'm seeing here, and you've got a bit of a rounding, sort of a bottoming formation forming. So this has to hold up. If you're losing this area, this is potentially a double top, right? And if this is a double top, if this is an actual technical double top, then you're coming down here to this volume area, and it's going to be like 61.7. And you can see there's confluence there because there was some consolidation at that area before. So you've got a point of control just above that 62.9, 63 area. So this is a higher volume node that's sticking out here, where you could come down to test this area if this is a technical double top. And if you move out further, move over to another chart here. This will be a little bit cleaner. I'm going to swing all the way out to the daily here, actually. So this is important to highlight too. So in terms of the daily price action, are we going to continue to hold this pattern, right? Which people have been highlighting this kind of an inverse head and shoulders. I'll clean this up just a little bit here and get that fib out of there. Essentially, this area here has to hold, right? So we had retest last week of this area here. I'm just trying to clean this up a little bit because I've got smaller lines on there drawn for smaller trades and stuff that I've been making. But this right here is an important area to think about right now. So we came down, wick down, tested the 21 MA, a little more indecision, came back up. Technically broke above this level, this spider line, could not hold it as support, came back down, testing again the 21 MA. So what's going to break first? Is it going to be this line that's acting as resistance? Does this get flipped into support? Or does this middle line on the Bollinger Band break and we go much lower, and potentially this is, like I said, a double top? If that's a double top, it's not even a big deal, okay? If we come back down here, it's not a big deal, because all that does is just make a more consolidative and larger right shoulder, right? So if we come back down to that area that I highlighted, 61.9, 61.7, whatever. You know, even a little bit lower. You know, come all the way down to 61. Test this area right here. You got lots of confluence right here with these closes, wicks, etc. This area is fine to retest. Do not panic if we come back down and retest that area. It may take a little bit more time to play out like that. Don't panic if we come back down and retest this 200 daily. This is at 55K. Don't panic. Accumulate. That would literally just be the bottom of the range. All right? Don't panic. There's no reason to panic. We could stay in this for the rest of the summer and just boom, pump September, October, and people start to take profits November into December. Be patient. Buy dips. Don't sell when the market is in a position like this. Don't sell when the market is down here. If you're going to sell, make sure that you're selling tops and that you're able to reaccumulate. This isn't an area to sell, in my opinion. This honestly isn't even an area to trade. This is an in-between zone. So just be patient right now. If we come back down here, buy. If we come back up here and we break out, you're going to want to sell up here and wait for the retest. Okay? And that would probably be like around 75, 76K. Maybe a little bit higher. All right? So moving on to Bitcoin dominance. And, 4 hour is not telling us like the most convincing story right now. You're a little oversold on the stochastics. Overbought on the stochastics. You're overbought on the RSI. So really this kind of looks like it's flagging out and potentially, sure why I had that line drawn in that manner. Potentially this is actually a bearish retest. Okay. So we could be looking at that as a bearish retest for BTC dominance. I'm just not seeing the bearish divergence come in here yet that would confirm that. Maybe there's something on a smaller time frame. There you have it. So you've got these closures up here, right? Much higher in the price action than this closure here, but you have this peak on the RSI. And you're lower on the RSI here, corresponding to higher movement in the quote-unquote price action, as this is actually just more like a measurement or an index, but that should bring BTC dominance back down to this area here. Okay, so expect that to consolidate over the weekend. Tether dominance did have this breakout. All right, we highlighted this bullish divergence last week. Nothing surprised us here. Okay, so I guess I shouldn't say last week. I guess I was looking at this over the last few days, but I did have this mapped out. There's a little bit of maybe a diamond right here. All right, and you can see this bullish divergence came in, actually printed two drives. The stronger drive here, you get that big bounce, and you get this spike. So right now you're seeing consolidation, a little bit of a flag above the POC, and sort of above this spider line here as well. So, if you're holding this as support, you're going to see further pumpage. If this breaks, you're going to come back down, test this 21, test this area in this sort of support area. What we really would like to see is, this flag breakdown, come back down and create a new low for USDT dominance that would continue to pump the market. As to how possible that is right now, it's going to be questionable. If we take a look at our daily close, you've got this RSI that is consolidating here just below the 50 level. You've got stochastics pointing up. And unfortunately, unless you're short or in cash, you've got this bullish divergence here. So this could continue to play out upside for Tether dominance if we don't see some retracement back below this level. I would say below 4.5%. All right. So moving on to total 3. Looking at this volatility on the 4-hour. Excuse me while I wet my whistle here. This, folks, is what reeks of probably too much leverage in the market, where you can see we had this breakout and could not hold the 21 MA, had this flash crash, and now you're getting what appears to be potential bearish retest for total 3. So this level has to hold here. We need to print some type of a divergence at some point, potentially even on like a smaller time frame, 15-minute or 1 hour, in order to dig out here. What you really would want to see is get back into this pattern and back above it, flip that into support along with this 21 MA on the Bollinger Bands for the 4 hours. So this move did not play out. It was a measured move there. Did not play out to that $750 billion range. Saw this little BART and rejection. So now we're getting consolidation below this point of control. And these wicks are telling me that we do have some support there. Nice. So you've got this nice bullish divergence on the 1 hour. We need that to hold us up for our altcoins to pump back up. So eyes on that. Moving on to Ethereum. Ethereum BTC pair. Extremely oversold on the daily stochastics. We did have a little bit of a breakdown of this flag on the RSI. Currently consolidating at the 50 level. Let me show you why this is potentially bullish. As you know, despite the price action breaking down below this 21 MA here, when we flip over to the 4 hour, we have exactly what the doctor ordered to get this going back to the upside. And that is that bullish divergence right there. So stochastics pointing up on the 4 hour, bullish divergence. Essentially, you need to get that divergence to get you back above this point of control and back into the pattern so that this move can continue for the ETH BTC pair. Any rejection there, obviously you'll see further breakdown for the pair. So if we look at the USDT pair for Ethereum, we did have this same breakdown. You know, we had this kind of a rising wedge or rising channel. So that broke down as they're prone to do. Measured move on this is actually a lot deeper. So question is, do we come back down here? You know, measured move on that would take you back to about 3370-ish. But if we were to look at like a local fib, right? Local fib would take you deeper and would take you down to this area or retest this breakout of this sort of cup and handle. So if we see a breakdown further, if this can't hold, you know, maybe we get like 3 waves down type of a thing, a heavily corrective type of a move, you know, something like that. So maybe we'll see that play out for Ethereum. You know, a more aggressive move would be to even come all the way back down and retest this 200 daily. There's a lot of volume down here. That would be in the range of like 2,900. So if there's too much leverage in the market, excuse me, they'll try to flush that out, and we'll see a further move down. So I've got a highly leveraged position open right now in Ethereum and Bitcoin and BNB and XRP for that matter. So in terms of where we're at right here, I'll definitely be keeping an eye on this. I was hoping to be able to hold that trade to new all-time highs, but the consolidation here is going to determine that for me, whether I'll be able to do that and whether we'll get a volume gap breakdown here. So Not sure where I'm going to trail my stop to at this point. Maybe just below this 382 here. I mean, I got in, this level down here, so I'm not too concerned about liquidation or anything like that, but obviously would like to keep some of the profit on the way back down if we're not going to make a larger move up. All right, so moving back on to BNB, third largest cryptocurrency by market cap. Still have my trade open there. That's made a larger move over the last week or so, and you can see it did come back down a little bit, wick down to this area that I had highlighted, the supply zone around $663. Actually just wicked, and I mean just wicked to the top of the golden pocket retrace there. So a lot of the time I don't trust those because it's kind of a fake. It's like, oh, it hit the golden pocket. No, it didn't. So, it's possible that we see another move down, either double bottom here closer to the golden pocket, a little below it around 647, or there's a much higher volume node around 629, 630 area. Okay. Even if you were to come back down here to this area just above $600, it's still going to be looked at as like a retest of the larger breakout that we had here. So keep an eye on that. How much of a retest do we need here for BNB? Still looks pretty bullish to me. In terms of XRP, we had these nasty wicks here. Nasty wicks. I was in a long position. Okay. I did say on the last podcast that I was holding that position, hoping for higher highs. That did not come in. I did manage to exit that position right here on this confirmation before we had that large dump. I re-entered right here on confirmation. All right. So I was able to re-enter on confirmation there. Where we saw this print. Okay. So I got in at a pretty good level, and full disclosure, the first attempt to enter on this trade did get liquidated, but I am currently in enough profit on the current trade to the point where it actually has paid for that liquidation plus some. So every once in a while you miss, but if you hit correctly, your misses won't matter. So I don't beat myself up about that stuff. It wasn't a large amount of money. And the reason that I entered with a smaller amount, because it was a very, very high risk, very volatile trade. So second one stuck, and now we're sitting in profit, and you've got this kind of a falling, broadening wedge that's forming here. Doesn't really look like the most bullish pattern. You're sort of waffling below this point of control. If I have to close this trade out for, a few $100 profit this weekend, I'm not going to be mad at myself. So I would say any break of this structure, I'll close it out. But I got a good enough entry to the point where I don't have to worry too much, thankfully. So XRP, I'm still looking for higher price targets. Both the daily and the weekly are pointing to the potential for larger moves. We did have this ridiculous wick down again that I was pointing to. So you can see here what XRP is doing. I want to highlight this because this wick, 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 all within this range. Wick, wick. All of these wicks are telling me that very soon something pretty large is going to happen for XRP. Now, whether it's just a 5 to 10x move, or whether it's a 20x move, or whether it's a 50 to 100x move, That's not up to me to determine, but for as long as this cryptocurrency has been consolidating and as long as market participants have been talking about it and talking about its potential, and as long as the underlying fundamentals are there, there's a possibility this crypto could pump far, far beyond its all-time high. So for me, it's still worth the risk reward to have been holding it through uh, the quote unquote opportunity cost loss of the last year or two in the market, where essentially it's really just been sitting around 50 cents outside of a pump up to about 90 cents or so, and a dip down to about 30 cents. 50 cents has pretty much been the range, and it's just been sitting there almost like a stable coin. Typically when you see these assets that have been consolidating for years and they're starting to get this tight, and you can see it's tight here. It's tight with the 200 daily and the 200 weekly, and the 200 weekly just crossed the 200 daily. So that may be our bullish cue here. If you can get price action to flip both into support, I would look for a larger macro move for XRP. All right. So to me, there is a risk reward payoff for being in this coin right now. If you're not in this coin and you don't have, a few percent of your portfolio devoted to it like I do, I believe at some point you'll end up missing out and questioning as to why you didn't have some. But we'll see as to how that plays out over the next year or two here. All right. So moving on, I did get a bottoming call here, a bottoming signal for Velo. This is Velodrome on Coinbase. This is kind of a sister to Aerodrome. All right. So if you take a look here, we do have a potential bullish divergence confirming on the daily here today. So we'll keep an eye on that. It's not like the strongest divergence, but it is there. So what we've really seen is kind of more of a sideways breakout from this falling wedge. And sometimes you see that if the volume isn't there in the market. So for the volume to come back in, if you create this double bottom and divergence on the daily, you could get this move for Velo. And if you're going to take the trade at this level, make sure that you're taking profits. Look to take profit around this golden pocket area. That'll double up for you. It's at like just under 12.5 cents right now. Once you even get up to this like 0.5 fib, you can guarantee your moon bag at that point. So even if you get a dead cat at the 0.5, you could look to take profit there around the 26 cents level, and that's going to be a clean trade. And you can hold the moon bag for the bull run and see what happens for Velodrome. Look into the fundamentals on that one on your own time, folks. All right. And with all that said, I know we're far into today's episode, but please, if you've made it this far, if you haven't on your way in, make sure that you're honking the like button, get subscribed to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. We'll bring you these episodes every weekend and some updates during the week as we see fit. Another coin I would like to cover here is Notcoin. We are seeing some consolidation here, a little bit of a breakdown of a falling wedge after a topping move around 3 cents. So this thing made a big move from 0.004-ish, 0.004.5 up to 3 cents. So anyone who mined this coin or managed to buy the coin when we recommended it a few weeks back, you're in very, very nice profit now. So to me, this actually looks like a potential breakout on retest. We did actually wick down to one of the initial supply zones that I had highlighted. If that doesn't hold for any reason, there is a very, very strong supply zone and point of control here down around 1.2 cents. So I would start averaging into this coin, and if it goes lower, jump in more. I believe this thing can make a larger move as we progress into the bull run. This could be a big one, actually. All right. Another one I have an eye on is Axelar. This broke down to the bottom of the range. This looks like it's in a very, very good spot for a buy right now. Do have a bullish divergence that's printing here, so I'll highlight that. That's a very nice 4-hour bullish divergence, folks. So again, look into fundamentals on your own time. This is a coin that could be huge in the bull run, and I may be shifting some finances around to jump into this one. Full stop. I am not in this one yet, but I am planning to be, and I am also looking at a few others. So one other one that I'm potentially looking at, I'll throw that out here real quick, and this is going to be the last one, is Pendle Finance. So Pendle's had a nice wick down here as well. And we're starting to see some bullish divergence come in on the 4-hour there too. Oh, maybe not. Maybe not. Okay. We'll have to keep an eye on the divergences for Pendle. Maybe there's something on the hourly. Yeah, not seeing it yet. All right, we'll keep an eye on that one. We'll keep an eye on that one. This definitely has some double toppy vibes. But this candle was really weak, this last selling candle. So this tells me the bulls have a shot to come back in here. You got a little bit of hidden bullish here on the daily. All right. So Pendle Finance, folks. That's going to be about it for me. All right. So I am Jason Bruce, your host with the Honks. Once again, I am honking on out of here. This has been the podcast for the 8th of June, 2024. I hope you all enjoyed it. Once again, on the way out, please, if you haven't honked the like button, hit the bell for notifications, get subscribed to the channel. Take care, folks. Much love. God bless. We'll be seeing you very soon again. I thank you as always. Have a fantastic weekend. We'll talk to you soon.